Do you think the Russians can do anything to stop the tide of the fellas?
And you are like, oh, well, okay, there's a lot of US propaganda. Okay, fine. There is. Great. But you can read what the Russians say, right? Like, you can open up their news websites, plug in Google Translate, and read this shit. And you read just straight up fascist ideology.
People kind of see Zelenskyy as like the god king of Ukraine because that's the only politician in Ukraine they know. But if Zelenskyy was legitimately to go sit down and be like, okay, we'll give you Luhansk, maybe not Donetsk, or like something like that, he would immediately be removed from power.
But if you are someone with a platform this large, and you are this influential, and you are literally spreading Russian propaganda designed to enable genocide, guess what? You are a collaborator. You are a fascist collaborator. Taiwan, great. Talk to Taiwanese leftists. They will tell you what the problems are, who the players are. They'll tell you what they think. Then you'll have a much better understanding of the conflict there than listening to literally anyone else.
And okay. Also, Lonerbox, what's your next big project?
I'm just editing it now. It's a video about abortion debates.
A video about abortion debates. So not
Like I'm kind of
abortion.
debating it with myself. Yeah, it's about the ethics of abortion. So, the first half is going to be like bad arguments that left-wingers make, and it's going to be like a staged debate where I'm like playing a liberal versus a conservative. That's why I got the American flag and the MAGA hat, the fucking wristband, the Trump 2024. Fuck Biden.
Wow.
You know? Yeah.
Hot.
Hell yeah, brother.
So when did you decide you were gonna copy ContraPoints?
Since I started the channel, mate.
Perfect. I'm trying to do more offline content, but it's not like video essays. It's more just offline commentary where I look into the camera and tell everybody why we need to support the CIA. It's fantastic. Okay.
I really love that.
Okay.
There is no CIA.
There is no CIA. The CIA doesn't exist. It's a made up fraud to scare children during the nighttime. Okay.
Yeah, we don't talk about that.
We don't talk about that. I'd like to welcome you all to an episode of the Ukraine Report that has been a lot in pre-production phases. I know we haven't had a Ukraine Report in about 2 weeks, but we're going to get back to doing it weekly. It just took a while to set this one up, but I'm excited to have this one because I have a whole host of interesting guests. Some of them my audience may recognize, like Lonerbox, but some of these people you might not recognize because not regular guests on the channel. So I'm going to go around the room, and I'm going to start on my right-hand side and have people introduce themselves. I'm going to start with Lonerbox. How you doing, Loner?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. I'm Lonerbox. I make YouTube videos and I fight on the internet.
You fight on the internet. What kind of fights do you have on the internet, Loner?
You know, debates, Twitter wars, people threatening to sue me for defamation.
Oh, I love that one. I got threatened to be sued for cyber terrorism. So, I like being in the lawsuit camp. I'm now going to throw it over to Pete. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you guys?
Could you introduce yourself, Pete? How would the audience possibly know you?
Well, if you guys are on Twitter, you're familiar with the fellas and all that entails. One of the, I don't know, you'd call us core members because it's sketchy and disorganized, but I've been involved with it since the beginning.
Oh, so you would say you're a fellas founder, one of the founding fathers of the fellas.
If one could say that, I suppose.
Yeah, all these new fellas, they're just puppies, but you're an old like grandpa dog.
Well, that, and I'm probably older than 3/4 of them, but it is what it is.
That is true. The fellas is younger on average, which is interesting to see. Like generally like pro Western or like pro NATO accounts with a lot of young people. This is the first time I've ever really seen that. But we'll get into that in a bit. Next, I want to throw it over to my wonderful 40K fan. Or what's your real name? 40K fan. That's your Discord username.
Marcel.
Marcel.
Yeah. Hey. Yeah. I'm Marcel. Right now I'm a PhD candidate in Scotland, but before that I was a intelligence analyst for DoD, specifically the Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA. There is no CIA. There's only the DIA. And I worked on primarily Persian Gulf stuff, but I think, as we'll see later in the podcast, there's sort of an interesting overlap between sort of Persian Gulf security issues and what's happening with Russia right now.
Okay, and finally, can I throw it over to my Camlink merchant, the person who helped hook me up with how I could get a cam link in Kiev. How's it doing, how are you doing, buddy?
Hey, not too bad. I'm glad to be here. Romy Kratsky. I'm a journalist here in Ukraine. I'm the managing editor of the wonderful English language Ukrainian news site, english.nv.ua, the new voice of Ukraine. And I am the co-host of my own podcast because I'm a millennial and I'm over 30. That is Ukraine Without Hype. So if you want to help support independent Ukrainian journalism, you should listen to my podcast.
It's a really good podcast, and I recommend people go check it out. Now, today we are here to talk about everyone's favorite NATO troll operation, and that is the fellas. They kind of just like sprung out onto the scene out of nowhere, and now they're everywhere. They've recently passed over $100,000 raised for the Georgian Legion. Not only have they passed $100,000, I think they already raised like $107,000. Like they're just blazing past it at incredible breakneck speed. We're seeing a lot more and more high-profile political commentators becoming fellas and getting their own little cartoon dog avatars, and that's left a lot of people confused. Like, why is all of a sudden a bunch of cartoon dogs bullying Russian ambassadors off of the internet? It's a crazy interaction to see it. That Twitter itself couldn't deal with these Russian war crime apologists, but a bunch of cartoon dogs can. And so today I wanted to talk about this because Vice has now covered the fellas. Polish TV stations have covered the fellas. They're getting more and more coverage in print media. They're getting more and more general knowledge on social media about them. And so today I actually brought on a good friend down here, Pete, who was one of the founding fathers of the fellas. You could say that while we have a new pups on the block, he's one of the old dogs, an OG dog. And so I wanted to talk to him, and the rest of the people here have probably seen the fellas on Twitter, what they think of the fellas, what the fellas are about, and where do they come from. So can you explain, Pete, the humble beginnings of the fellas, since you have made so many of these fellas since the beginning?
God. Yeah, so it really comes from Comma Camellia on Twitter. He's a Polish kid in Britain. I mean, kid, he's a grown man, but everybody's a kid to me anymore, it seems like. But under any circumstances, a real good friend of mine. And, he was posting these little cartoon dogs, and there's, a handful of us who are like, oh, that's kind of funny. We'll get involved in this. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, it just kind of blew up on us. And, he, on May 19th, somebody asked, I'll throw you $20 if you make me one. And it's like, well, no, if you donate it to the Georgian Legion, I'll do it. And then the next thing we knew, we were sitting there around 10 grand raised like a week or two later. And it's like, shit, let me help you out. And since then, I've made like 350. He's made a whole ton. We've got 20 odd artists that are working with us, making them for people. It's just been a madhouse.
And so you guys have raised over $100,000 so far. I even have a fella. Lonerbox doesn't have a fella because, of course, he's a, what do you call, a saboteur. But I have a fella. You've raised over $100,000 in under 3 months. Why do you think so many people are have so much appeal for this little dog character, this pro-Ukraine dog, which originated with the Cheems, which is like an older meme?
It's an older meme, but it checks out. And that's part of it. It's just a goofy little dog. There's level of inclusivity. We make, God, I have had some strange requests. I've had some just normal requests. As long as it's not a little mustached Austrian fella, we'll probably make you a fella. But, in Lonerbox, if you want one, dude, you just hit me up later. We'll take care of you, dude. I got you.
Will do.
Lonerbox, now you have to. The NATO troll farm is bullying you into getting a dog profile picture.
Don't make me send my friends.
Yeah, I didn't actually have any idea what that profile picture meant until right now, so that's cool.
Hey, look, Lonerbox is learning in real time. Can I just read the title of this Vice article, and you please explain it to me? Because this is not usually something I would see on, as a news article headline. Shitposting Shiba Inu accounts chased a Russian diplomat offline. The fellas, or NAFO, are a loose cadre of extremely online shitposters who are raising money for Ukraine and fighting Russian disinformation. I don't want to get too into all of the article. This is from Vice. They post a lot of the memes you guys made, a lot of the videos, et cetera, et cetera. But in this, it basically describes an incident where a bunch of fellas, a bunch of people who paid to have these little pictures made of the Georgian Legion. This money goes to the Georgian Legion, which is then used to fight the Russian army. How did they bully this guy off the internet? He's a Russian diplomat. This is a man with real political power. What happened here?
Well, so Ambassador, I've made the critical error of don't feed the trolls. He fed the trolls. Live Fast Die Young on Twitter got him to respond to something, and then of course, as soon as we all saw the response, everybody had to jump in. I think there was probably 200, 300, 400 comments. Straight ratioed him all the way off of it. It was rather entertaining. It was a fun couple of days. I made pictures. God, freaking man, the comments were insane. And then he just dipped for like a week. And nobody heard from him. It was like, okay, maybe this guy just actually really just is done. I don't know. And then he popped back up, and that was a mistake for him too.
Yeah, apparently he took.
Now he's just blocking everybody.
He took like a short vacation actually because of it. I heard that he actually took like a vacation. Quote, according to him, it was a vacation, but it feels like it might have been a stress-induced vacation.
One assumes, I don't know. I wouldn't want to be on Twitter freaking pissing us off either, because God knows that anytime you're arguing with a cartoon dog, any semblance of dignity is gone.
That's the thing. I could post like 20 paragraphs on something, or anybody with a fellow account could post like 20 paragraphs arguing against Russian disinformation. And if they say anything to me, I could just ultimately just fall back on, dude, I'm a cartoon dog. You're arguing with a cartoon dog right now on the internet. Do you think you're respectable? And then they just fall apart. Like there's nothing they can do. The response, all they can do is just ignore the fella. But if they ever just dip their toe into it, like they've doomed themselves, because now they're arguing with cartoon dogs on the internet.
Exactly.
Now, I do want to say, now you guys have raised a lot of money, over $107,000 for the Georgian Legion. You must have like almost like 1,000+ fellas out there somehow. Like the amount of
easily, yeah.
How many fellas do you think there are in total now?
I would say at least 1,500. I mean, that's just rough conservative guesstimate here. Because while we're not organized, primarily our donation vector is going to the Georgian Legion, or other units that we can actually identify, verify, and that we know are getting the stuff, the funds, and they're doing the things with the funds that we're raising. But they're helping the whole different range of just different charities and things like that. But there's times, and I've made, God, I would say probably not a third, but up there pretty close. And I'm still seeing fellas that I've never even seen before pop up, and I'm helping coordinate the whole effort behind the scenes. So it's a really fascinating phenomenon. Why?
What's your favorite fellow request that you have done, and what's your strangest fellow request that you have done?
Oh God, my favorite. Okay, this is going to appeal to Marcel here, but I definitely did a Black Templars fella, and I'll have to send that to you later.
Nice.
The strangest, man, they're all over the place. I'd have to. I'll circle back to that because I got to think on it for a bit. But there's been some strange ones. Usually, it's not so much strange as there's very specific stuff. Like, I want this particular fellow with this particular hairstyle and this camouflage pattern in a field doing this, and I'm like, okay. So,
got it. So people can be very picky with their fellas. Like they're the collectibles now.
They can be. Yeah, they can be. And then sometimes you get the guys like drops $500. Yeah, I just want to. Okay, here's probably my strangest, but also my favorite was. Yeah, I just want the guy or my fella to have the chemical symbol for crocodile on his shirt. That's all you want? Yeah. Okay.
Oh no.
So.
Hey, do you guys think that this is what NFTs should have been? Because I think if this was what NFTs was, I would have been a lot more supportive.
I mean, yeah, the money's going to a good cause, and it's actually drawn by humans, and it has some artistic value behind it.
It's cute. It's fun. You feel like you're part of a club that's not completely like flushing your money down the toilet. I mean, could you imagine if all the money that was dumped into NFTs were dumped into fellas, man? The Georgian Legion would have their own Air Force.
We'd be halfway away.
That is true. I do want to talk about the one of the main principles of the fellas, which seems to be this idea of basically combating Russian disinformation. So the Russian government has worked very hard to push out a lot of narratives that we know just falsifiably are true. We know about the little green men in Crimea. We know about how they've lied about their soldiers being present in the Donbass for the last 8 years. We know how they lied about Ukraine invading Russia to launch the war. It's already the video camera footage that they published was geolocated to be within Russian occupied territory within the Donbass. So we know that they did a false flag, much like the Germans did when they were going to invade Poland. They actually dressed up in Polish uniforms and attacked German positions to launch that false flag attack. We have seen them lie more recently with the execution of 53 Azovstal defenders, where they blamed it on the HIMARS system. We've seen them lie all across the board. And these narratives get pushed everywhere, not only by their state media apparatus in places like RT and domestically. And the domestic Russian propaganda is like on a whole other level. It's like completely different. They're going to like show nuclear explosions over Dublin for some reason. But they have worked very hard with the Internet Research Agency and a lot of like basically cyber operations to try to spread disinformation, not only to benefit their interests directly with fostering pro-Russian narratives with their invasion, but also with trying to cause chaos in other countries by supporting like extremist candidates and like most recently, I think it was like the Black Hammer movement was actually exposed. That was led by Ghazi Koto for actually possibly being involved with the Russian government. So why do you think it's so important for just kind of grassroots anti-disinformation campaign?
I mean, you pretty much laid it out there. I mean, the folks are lying about this stuff, and it's not necessarily the primary thing that we're doing. I mean, obviously, the biggest thing that we're pushing for is the fundraising, but you still got 1,000 different people doing 1,000 different things, and again, like we said earlier, you start arguing with a cartoon dog on the internet, you kind of lost. Now you got 10 or 15 of those guys just show up, and it just ruins your whole day.
That is true. Twitter ruins my day no matter what, but my day would be ruined even further if brain-damaged cartoon dogs were yelling at me in my replies and I got into arguments with all of them. My day would be much, much worse. I will say that there has been some backlash to the fellas. There was some people who tried to make copycat fellas but made them pro-Russian. There were some people who tried to make like a cat version of the fellas because, cat versus dogs, and they were pro-Russian cats. That fell apart pretty quickly. They just didn't seem to be very organized. There have been Russian diplomats trying to get into the replies and argue with the fellas, never working out well. A lot of Russian state-sponsored media commentators, of course, they have yet to win a single victory. It seems for the second time in the last year, the Russians are at a manpower disadvantage. This is happening a lot more in recent history. So my question would be, do you think the Russians can do anything to stop the tide of the fellas?
Well, if I did, why the hell would I tell you guys?
That's
They're
true.
listening on your shit.
Obviously. But
In seriousness though,
yeah.
Most of the efforts have just been embarrassing. So it's like these Z kids are like not even using MS Paint. It's like they're using the web version of MS Paint to try to make this stuff. It's just like, dude, I'm a 36-year-old suburban dad and I'm outdoing you. Come on now.
Damn. Look at that. Outmaneuvered by a boomer. A boomer in my eyes. Anybody over the age of 25 is basically what are they, flappers from 1920s?
I mean, I guess we'll go with
basically.
Yeah.
So there has also been some people backlash, like saying like this is obviously, and this actually, can I just read one of these posts? This one was actually made about me. When they saw that I had a cartoon dog avatar. So I wanted to read this because I do think it's important for us to listen to criticism. Wouldn't you agree, Lonerbox? As streamers, we listen to criticism all the time. And as content creators, we should listen to criticism. And so I wanted to make sure that I read this. So this is from Chris Legion. He is a person on Twitter who is not a huge fan of me and some other people. And this is what he posted. There's a bunch of pictures of my Twitter account with the fella avatar. Here is liberal breadtuber Dylan Burns sporting the deformed Chihuahua avatar. This clown is actually part of a NATO state-sponsored troll farm. More proof that the Vosh community is straight up tied to U.S. intelligence. So my question to you, Mr. Pete, is why didn't you tell me you were a NATO operative?
Because NATO operatives don't exist.
That is
That
true.
is the CIA.
NATO and the CIA don't exist. It's just all fellas.
Yep.
Why do you think that
And-
people are so surprised about this? I mean, it feels like all the polling indicates the vast majority of people support Ukraine, right? There's no really like mainstream like pro-Russia stuff. It's mostly just like alt media and contrarians on the internet mostly, and maybe a few like extremist politicians. Why do you think there's so much surprise that there's so much pro-Ukraine sentiment on the internet and people are willing to shitpost in favor of Ukraine?
I ask myself this on the daily because I get tagged in these various debates with dudes like 10 followers and a Z on their profile, and I really couldn't tell you. There's a contrarian streak that's run throughout media, I guess, for the last several years, but for some reason everybody wants to suck on Daddy Russia's. I'm getting things I probably shouldn't say. But in seriousness, the Russians have worked very hard to push these narratives into, I guess, mainstream, if you will, but or not mainstream, but the contrarian spaces where the mainstream, isn't trusted so much. I really couldn't tell you as to why people buy into it because I don't, and I don't have the understanding of that psychology. I guess it would probably be about the same as like a cult, but it's not my area of expertise by any stretch of the imagination.
Okay. So now that people have an idea of the fellas, people know what the fellas are about, that the money's going to fighting the Russian army, and that the more fellas pro-Russia trolls and pro-Russia accounts see, the more migraines they have. Where could people get a fellow? Like, how do you even get one? Is there like a fellow website where you submit your like card? Do you need a license to be a fellow? Do you need to be 21 and older? Is it like alcohol? Like, are there certain states that ban fellas like marijuana and certain states where it's legal? Where can somebody get a fella?
Well, the best place to get a fellow would be go on to Twitter, on my good buddy Kama's Twitter profile at _Camellia, KAMA_KAMILIA. And there's a pinned post right there. You make a donation to the Georgian Legion. You send us a screenshot on that thread, we'll hook you up. It's that simple.
Okay.
There's like I said, there's 25 artists, so we'll get you taken care of.
I just remember two questions I had. Was there ever a time where you're just like sitting there and you're seeing like Vice News cover the fellas, and you're seeing like Polish TV stations like fellas, and then they speak a bunch of Polish, and you just see these dumb cartoon dogs in the background with like blowing up Russian tanks, and like this is getting like mainstream coverage, especially in some Eastern European countries. You ever step back and think, what the hell have I done here?
Well, considering that Polish thing played my entire Devo Whip It video in its entirety on
That was
on the
one of my
background while they're
favorites,
having
by
a
the way.
Jewish-
It's really good.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. But yeah, no, it was a very surreal experience. I am the Warax drops me this link. He goes, dude, you're going to watch this. And I'm sitting there. I think I had just gotten into the office because I do this sometimes at work too. And I'm watching this video and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe this is some shitty meme that I made on my phone is being played on mainstream television. And granted, another country, but every day I wake up and it's like another article drops, and it is a very surreal experience.
Who has gotten a fella that you were like most personally surprised or excited by? Has there been any like celebrities or like commentators that you followed that was like, whoa, they won a fella, and you were like pretty surprised by that?
Well, Mark Hartling, I made his, and then there was a whole big discussion around that, and my Twitter notifications were on fire for like 3 days straight, so that was pretty cool.
Awesome.
Did you do Adam Kissinger's?
No, Kama did his, but that was also pretty cool.
Could I ask you, like, how politically diverse is the fellows? Because I think a lot of people like look at the fellas and they think they're just like a bunch of like warhawks or something. But I've met like a lot of like very left wing, like kind of even socialist fellows. I've met fellows that are conservative. I've met fellows that are liberal. It seems to mostly the only thing that unites the fellows ideologically is they're generally anti-authoritarian, and they're generally just basically pro-Ukraine. Would you say there's a lot of ideological diversity in the fellas?
I would definitely say that. I think the best descriptor I've ever read of this, Valerie and Cinna was asking about why everybody, this is back in May, we started switching over to this avatar. And again, Live Faust Die Young on Twitter goes, well, it's basically the eat a bag of dicks Russia club. So that's I think that's a pretty accurate summation of it. But we have I think there's some straight up communist fellas. Well, not quite communists, but there's right, folks who are right of center. There's cranky libertarians. It's a pretty diverse group of people.
Got you. What's the wackiest ideology you've ever seen a fella have? Have you seen any like Posadist fellas, like fellas who want the whole world to see like the aliens come back and nuclear hellfire?
I have not. I have not. The probably the goofiest fellow we've got is a guy I think kind of might have drank his brains away a little bit and is definitely LARPing like he's a straight up intelligence agent, but that's neither here nor there.
CIA isn't real. How could it be an intelligence agent?
True. I think if you're an intelligence agent right now, the worst thing you could do is put a fellow avatar on your account because there's so many intelligence accusations.
Yeah, that would probably be a terrible idea.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. Where can people follow you?
I'm on Twitter. My Twitter is @Bravo, BRAVO, Kilo, KILO 6464.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. You have a good one, and keep shit posting, keep pissing off Russian diplomats, and keep making those dumb, deformed cartoon dogs that we all love so much.
You got it. Thanks for your time, fellas.
Awesome. Fellas. A good one.
Nice one.
Okay, look at that. Okay, now that he's gone, now we can talk shit about the fellas, okay? Now we're allowed to. Okay? now, Lonerbox, you can tell me how much you think it's a dumb meme, okay?
Terrorism.
Thank you, Lonerbox. I appreciate the
contribution to the discourse.
Very, very strong contribution to discourse. I could see Lonerbox the whole time. Like, what do I fucking say here? I don't know anything about these cartoon dogs or fucking NATO intelligence. Okay, I just made a video about Hassan.
I love it how that there's like a war that is just so like an invasion that's so indefensible, and people just organically supporting the side that's being invaded. It's not possible that they're like not from NATO or the United States. Yeah,
like they have to be. There's no other reason you would possibly support Ukraine, because Ukraine's not a real place. We're not real people. We're all just puppets. Like if you look closely enough, you'll see little lines that connect me to George Soros. It's right there. You just see proof of this in this video. And so, yeah. Why would anyone support a bunch of Nazi Soros puppets? It's unknown.
I mean, I am actually working on a video. I'm gonna actually record this video once I'm done. But I have these 3 points that I believe when it comes to like the contrarians that support Russia and like a lot of all these rules apply equally to conspiracy theorists, right? I think the first rule is that a lot of these people want to live in like a Tom Clancy novel. They want to be like the idea, like I found the truth that nobody else really knows, and I was able to discover it on 4chan or 8chan, or I discovered it while listening to my favorite podcast sponsored by like Raid Shadow Legend or like whatever, and I found the real truth from the comfort of my home while reading no literature on Ukraine, while not listening to Ukrainians, while not like going on the ground and being in Ukraine or doing. I was able to learn it all from the comfort of my home and doing no real research. I just had somebody else regurgitate me all my points. This is why I'm constantly like, don't just come to me and just listen to me on Ukraine, okay? I'm an American who's just currently living in Ukraine. There's so many other sources you should go to, like our fellow podcast host below me, Roman, who maybe you should check out his podcast. But so I think that's one of the reasons they do it, because they want to live in a Tom Clancy novel and they're contrarians. I think the second thing is like, podcast nation. There's less filters for information, so it's a lot easier to spread disinformation, right? Back in the day, if you wanted to publish the elders, what was it? The something of Zion. What was it called?
The Elders of Zion.
Yeah, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. You had to get a printing press, actually put it all together, distribute it manually. Now, you just post that thing on 4chan, and before you know it, they're going to say Hunter Biden's laptop discovered it, and then boom, you've got your whole thing. They've spread it for you. So I think it's a lot easier to spread disinformation. There's less filters standing between you and distributing mass media. And so I think that's another reason why you see so many people like chewing up these talking points. And I think the third part, and I think this is the reason why they're so surprised that there's so many pro-Ukraine, accounts out there, so many people that are so supportive of Ukraine, is that social media is a mirror of what you want to consume. Is that if I actually liked a few posts in Spanish the other day, and what I noticed is after I liked those posts in Spanish, is all of a sudden my feed was filled with Spanish-speaking posts. And I have no clue what they're saying, but sometimes we'll like even more because, you know, the video would be funny and you don't need a language barrier to watch a kid getting smacked and say Lamau, right? And so then before I knew it, like 10 to 20% of all my Twitter posts I was seeing were just all in Spanish. I had no clue what any of them said. And recently, by God's infinite wisdom, for some reason, he put like a furry thing in my, Twitter account, and I liked it because it was very gay.
Sure, he did.
And before you knew it, now my whole feed is now flooded with furry stuff. And so social media, what I'm trying to get at here, besides saying I'm a closeted furry, is that social media is social media is a mirror of whatever you want to consume. So if you start liking pro-Russia posts, before you know it, all of your feed is going to be pro-Russia posts. And so when you jump out of this little bubble social media has created for you, and they created that bubble because that's the best way to get money out of you and to keep you scrolling and make money out of advertisers, you go outside of that bubble and you're surprised that there's a world outside of the bubble. The same thing happens with QAnoners, the same thing happens with flat earthers, the same thing happened with the Sandy Hook people, the people who believe Sandy Hook was an inside job, and the same people happen with people who push these extremely unpopular narratives like that Russia should be supported, as they jump outside the bubble and they're surprised by the fact that the vast majority of Americans, the vast majority of Europeans, the vast majority of basically everybody do not support the invasion. They live in a bubble, and then they go outside the bubble, and then they have to interact with the real world. And that's how I was able to have somebody accuse me of being an intelligence agent, because I had a cartoon dog as my avatar. It's because he's not getting outside, enough. He's not diversifying his media consumption.
In other words, he's not touching grass.
He is not touching grass. He has not been near grass. He just hasn't smelled grass in the last few years. He has chemically, I feel like he's like burnt every single like sensory like cell on his body to make himself incapable of touching grass at this point. If he thinks if all you need to be an intelligence agent is a cartoon dog avatar.
I think there's another aspect to it as well, which is like this bubble wasn't entirely formed naturally. The Russia's been pumping money into, I don't know, called the alternative media sphere, right, for decades now, building up brands on both like the left wing and the right wing to kind of trap people into these cultish modes of thinking, I guess. And as a result, you have not only people who kind of like, oh, they saw some, something saying Nazis are bad and they liked it, and now they're like rabidly pro-Russian. But it's also like the media personalities that they consume, the sources of news they trust. It's all connected within this pretty much Russian created media ecosystem. Like you have Gray Zone, you've got the guy from Means TV, even like just so many of these left wing and right wing commentators that are like taken, especially by like our generations, I guess, as more authoritative than like CNN or BBC or whatever. And then it turns out, they trust these people because these people have like good domestic takes or whatever the hell it is. And then, they're not going to doubt when they start posting outlandish Russian propaganda, because why would they? And of course, they're incredibly confused. How can anyone believe the mainstream? Everyone knows the corporate media is like lying to you 24/7, which not completely false, but at the same time, you're not an independent thinker if you're just parroting someone else's propaganda, right? And they got trapped in this. I'm so clever. There's that meme that was going on at the beginning of the invasion, which was like the NPC meme where they swap out the chip of like COVID for a chip with the Ukrainian flag on it. This is how these people think. They literally see that meme, a meme that is directly reflective of them, and then they believe this applies to everyone else because they're so trapped in this curated media ecosystem. And I don't actually know what you do with these people. I think arguing with a cartoon dog is probably one of the better solutions I found online.
I think a lot of it is, I believe there's a lot of things about the establishment that needs to be changed in the United States, for example. I believe that we need to make it so every single felon can vote. I even am so aggressive on this that I believe even prisoners should vote. Right? I believe that we should release basically everybody who's a nonviolent drug offender from prisons. We should legalize marijuana. There's a bunch of things about the established nation state that is America right now that I want to drastically change. Right? But The thing is that I think a lot of people are just like, I don't like the establishment right now, or there's aspects of the establishment or how society is right now, that basically anything that is not that, I'm just going to give like a big old thumbs up to. And that's what it feels like with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But I think a lot of people don't realize that the way we get to a society is years and years and years of like societies like building institutions, building programs, building laws, building, you know, judicial systems. And along the way, a lot of other things were proposed. You know, we had the Articles of Confederation. We had a bunch of different ideas that created the modern United States. And this is true of all countries. And so I think a lot of people don't realize that for every institution that's pretty flawed or idea that's good, right? There's a million other ideas that are so much worse or just complete hogwash. Nazbol ideology, or you could talk about Posadism, or anarcho-primitivism, or a million different ideology of flat earth nonsense. The Sandy Hook truth. There's a million things out there that are going to be trash. For every idea that's even tenable, there's going to be 100 that are untenable, garbage, yet people still believe in them because they want to be able to say, I'm anti-establishment. But they don't do it with any, like, strong ideological foundation or, like, examining, like, what we should keep and what we shouldn't keep. And so it gets to a point where they'll just grab anything that says, I don't like the establishment, and they'll just accept anything, including a mafia state invading another country using blood and soil arguments and just blatantly ignoring international law. But no, they're a base Christian nation. I mean, their drug abuse is like through the roof. Their wife beating abuse is, you know, through the roof. You know, they've got some of the lowest church attendance rates in all of the world. I think it's like 4% to 5% of Russians actually attend church every week. But you know, they're super based, they're super red pilled because, you know, they beat up gay people. So therefore, I don't know, it feels like people are just trying to grab for anything because they're so desperate for anything besides the current state of affairs.
Yeah, I call it it's aesthetic based politics. It's not ideologically based politics. It's not even values based politics. It's purely aesthetics. This looks like something like this looks based, and normie stuff looks cringe. So I'm going to go with the based stuff. And there's no interrogation of like why I like this. What is this actually promoting? What kind of future would result if I like really apply if this idea or this ideology is really applied? There's no thought about that. It's just this looks cool. And as a result, I'm going to like completely believe everything everyone who looks this way says to me and question none of it. And if you ask questions or you push back on it, you're a CIA shill because, again, I don't have an ideology. I just have the aesthetics of being like anti-West or anti-American.
I think one of the most obvious examples of how it's all aesthetics. Hey, Lonerbox, you should know about this. Remember how people were releasing all those videos comparing like Chinese, American, and Russian military ads? And like they would show the Russian and Chinese military ads and they're like, I'm big, I'm strong, I've got big muscles. And they'll be running and like doing doubled flips and like they'll find a trans person and break their back over their knee or something. And then you go to like the American military ad and they're like, hello, I'm a lesbian from South Dakota who was raised up by 2 cats, and I live a completely herbal lifestyle. I sustain myself purely on crystals, and I think I would be a wonderful drone operator in the future. And people would look at these 2 ads, and they would say, this shows the moral decay of the United States, and this shows that America's going to collapse, and Russian military prowess and Chinese military prowess is like the up and up, and it's coming out. And I remember saying at the time that Russian and Chinese military ads are out of date because they're trying to appeal to the same group of people they've been appealing to forever. But in America, because of recruitment number shortages and stuff like that, they're basically trying to appeal to a huge, diverse group set of people. People who are not the traditional grunt style, I want to be the hero, but engineers, medical professionals, people who like, you know, have a basis in science. And so they're trying to diversify who they're recruiting for the military. And I remember making this argument. People just completely like dismissed it as this is nonsense. This just shows that Russian military culture is so much stronger. And then Russia, which was supposed to be the second most powerful military in the world, invades Ukraine, and it's just an utter disaster. All those ads meant nothing. All those aesthetics were nothing more than aesthetics. It was no different than basically like a Fortnite skin. Like, it doesn't make you a better player. You just get to choose what you look like. And I think a lot of people were surprised that aesthetics, you know, is not actually useful, right now. It's not going to be useful when you invade another country.
I mean, it's almost as if military propaganda advertisements don't actually tell you anything about the military that they're propagandizing for, right? I mean, what isn't it like a single digit percentage of people in the army actually do combat? So yeah, it makes perfect sense that you like that's the big manly man who's really good with a knife is only like a really small part of what you need for a military. Um, but like I think the problem is I think there's like kind of two types of like opposition. One is like this thing where you get how like pro-establishment dogma is obviously like a bad thing. You shouldn't really believe everything like the government says, but then equally bad is like anti-establishment dogma where you're the kind of person who will like proudly say something like, oh, if the government said that the sky is blue, you know, I'll start asking questions about whether the sky is blue. And like people will actually say this like very proudly. I think that's kind of like the most seductive one because it kind of grabs like people from the right and the left. But
I'm skeptic. That's what they love saying. I'm just a skeptic.
yeah, and then go on to
Just
believe
love
everything that the other skeptic media sources say. Yeah. I think I'm much more interested in the way that the left has approached this, though, especially online, especially the more kind of like Marxist leaning left, because I find there's this really big like ideological confusion where your narrative and your worldview doesn't really have a good answer for what's going on. So I think it's okay to say that like Marxism isn't really going to tell you what NATO means for the international proletariat, you know? Like you're not really going to get the answer there. Um, and the problem is you get all these kind of like left-wing thought leaders, especially Jeremy Corbyn is who I love is like a big offender here, is that they're still stuck in this kind of Cold War era where our side is definitely doing lots of propaganda and they're overthrowing regimes and shit like that. So what we should really do is hear what the other side has to say. But like, you know, Russia's not a communist country anymore, neither is China. So it's like trying to keep that like insistence on listening to the other side in is just like very useless, and that's kind of why I think there's this desperation to separate yourself from like a liberal narrative that you just end up kind of believing a very kind of confused and contradictory kind of narrative on the situation.
Did you?
It's so me because I'm like listeners may not know this. I'm literally a Marxist. I've identified Marxist, I don't know, since I was like 13. That's when I started trying to read Capital. Took a while, but I got there eventually. But like, so like I'm literally a Marxist, and then I see all of these like self-proclaimed, oh, you know, we're like Orthodox Marxists, whatever. That's why we support the genocidal fascist klepto-capitalist empire. Like, that's what I mean when I say these people don't have an ideology. Like, I don't think, and I've said this before, I'll say it again. Like, to me, these people aren't leftists. They're not Marxists. They're deluded if they sincerely believe they're Marxist, because it just proves they've never applied a single socialist tenet to their own life ever. If they believe, like, oh, if they're pro-Russian, they believe this baseless bullshit, obviously untrue propaganda. Because it's not hard from a Marxist perspective, a materialist perspective, to go, okay, Russia is organized as a kleptocratic mafia that masquerades as a nation state. It has some of the worst inequality in the goddamn world. Its leader has a literal palace. And at the same, and these are the guys that are like defending the international proletariat. Like, come on, you cannot be a Marxist and really apply that kind of analysis, because it's obvious. It's so obviously wrong. That these people are either deluded or lying is kind of what I have to figure, because otherwise there's no way. If you're like on the left and you are like, oh well, okay, there's a lot of U.S. propaganda. Okay, fine, there is, great. But you can read what the Russians say, right? Like, you can open up their news websites, plug in Google Translate, and read this shit. And you read just straight up fascist ideology. Like, you read Ukrainians are subhuman.
Alexander Dugin.
Aren't real people. That's why you can exterminate them. Like, the Russians say this in their own media, as you said.
Wasn't it Dmitry Medvedev who said, like, Ukraine, this is a disease of the mind?
Exactly.
Or the Russian Tsardom, which, of course, banned the Ukrainian language. Or you could see all the children's books in occupied Mariupol that are being done away with, the Ukrainian children's books.
Exactly. It's so obscenely reactionary that you cannot really be a leftist and support this. But I think that there is a reason why so many people who may self-identify as left support Russia, because they have this aesthetic picture of the Soviet Union in mind. The like Ushankas, the Red Star, busts of Lenin everywhere, and that, like, it looks cool, I guess, to them. And when that, like, narrative of actually everyone in Eastern Europe hates the Soviet Union, like, absolutely everyone here thinks it's a horrible idea. Their, like, left-wing ideology in the post-Soviet Union is basically relegated to the dustbin of history because everyone had such a bad experience in the USSR. And when you have people from that area start saying this, it challenges the basis of their identity, which is the Soviet Union is cool and, like, it fought America and stuff, yeah. And they honestly feel personally attacked because that is what they built the core of their persona around. And they kind of go crazy when you challenge that. They can't really accept that reality is actually the opposite of what the Soviets said.
So I actually want to ask Lonerbox a question here. Specifically, you brought up Jeremy Corbyn, and I know this is not on our itinerary today, but I wanted to ask you that you're within the British Empire, you're within occupied Scotland. And so I wanted to get your thoughts on what Jeremy Corbyn said, who I've always had a generally favorable view. He's not perfect, but a generally favorable view of Jeremy Corbyn in comparison to people like Boris Johnson or people like, of course, Theresa May. Like, Jeremy Corbyn, of course, was somebody I would vote for over any of those horrendous options. What did you think about his recent statement on Ukraine, if you saw it? And I think it was one of his staffers then followed up by saying that it's ridiculous to think Ukraine can win.
Yeah, it's nothing new. Corbyn's always been a little bit like that. When Ukraine annexed Crimea, he went on and said, "Well, we're one to talk. We invaded Iraq and we support Saudi Arabia."
Russia annexed Crimea.
Yeah, Russia.
Yeah.
Sorry, did I say Ukraine?
Yes.
Okay. Fuck. All right, but yeah. So he did that, and then when he was asked, "What do we do about this?" All he could talk about was peace process, and I'm like, what the fuck does that mean? Like, because I guess maybe he was, like, very successful in the Irish peace process, that ever since then, he had a big role in that. And I think ever since then, his answers to every foreign policy issue was just to say we need a peace process. But I think also his Russia kind of, like, sympathy has been there for a very long time. Even one of the things that I think maybe contributed a little bit to him costing the election was that when the Novichok poisoning happened in Salisbury, and it was so unambiguously clear that Russia was involved, and every other politician was leeching a load of clout by condemning Russia, and Theresa May expelling a bunch of diplomats. Corbyn said we should send the samples to Russia and wait till we hear their opinion, which is just, like, such a bad optical move. So it's nothing new. And now that he's kind of perpetuating this kind of, like, Chomsky Jacobin line, that I really don't understand this, that, like, giving Ukraine arms prolongs the suffering, as if to suggest, like, what's going to happen to the suffering if Ukraine isn't armed? Are they going to stop fighting? Is there going to be, like, a peaceful transfer of the of East Ukraine over to Russia and Crimea as well? Like, this means nothing. Like, there's no counterfactual where you're stopping suffering by stopping arming people who seem to be kind of hell-bent on fighting regardless of what happens.
I think
sorry, my door's just
so sorry.
No worries. I think the thing that got me about Jeremy Corbyn's rant about this is when we talk about negotiations, right? Which is, of course, having negotiations over a war is, like, everybody wants peace to come out of this. Everybody wants it. But if the negotiation is Russia has a position that is not moving and it is a position that is not in line with reality, as in, we're going to annex large swaths of Ukrainian territory, we want to demilitarize Ukraine, which would then just make it easier to invade in the future, we want to reinstall Yanukovych, or any of these ridiculous positions. If they legitimately are going to stay tied to those positions, you cannot expect Ukrainians or the Ukrainian government to cave to those positions or to give them really any headway. I'm sure the Ukrainian government has some stuff that would be willing to move on, possibly, right? Of course. But the idea that they'd be able to give up Ukrainian territory, I mean, the last poll I saw that 84% of Ukrainians, and this includes Crimea, would not be willing to give up any Ukrainian territory in negotiations with Russia. That's 84%. And when we talk about, I think a lot of people kind of see Zelenskyy as like the god king of Ukraine because that's the only politician in Ukraine they know. But if Zelenskyy was legitimately to go sit down and be like, okay, we'll give you Luhansk, maybe not Donetsk, or like something like that, he would immediately be removed from power. I mean, we saw 2004. He'd get the same fate as Yanukovych, and he would actually have to go to the Americans and say, can I get that plane ride after all? And he knows this, and all of Ukraine's political establishment knows this, and Ukrainians know this, that his popularity, which is very high right now, skyrocketed, not because, hey, he's Zelenskyy, the actor and the person who was on like Ukrainian Dancing with the Stars, is because he did what a lot of Ukrainian politicians wouldn't have done in his position, and that is stay and fight and be a good wartime leader. But if he starts conceding and therefore no longer being a good wartime leader, then he's going to be removed from power. And I legitimately believe that. Every Ukrainian I've asked this question to has answered back to me like, absolutely, he'd be removed from power immediately. And that chaos that would be caused would then the Russians would take advantage of, and then it would just be in a worse position afterwards. So when people say like Ukraine maybe just needs to concede some stuff, it's like, okay, do you know if that's political reality in Ukraine? And plus, they say this out of like this appearance of compassion, like, well, I just want the violence to end. And I understand that everybody wants the violence to end, but it's also not your decision if a people that are not you fighting want to continue fighting or not. Now, it is your decision if you want to send aid, and I understand that, but you can't make the argument against aid, oh, well, I want the suffering to end when the people are fighting because they don't want the suffering to be even longer under Russian occupation. So they have a million different buchas across occupied territory, or more POWs getting castrated, as we saw in a recent video that we're going to talk about in a second, or 53 Ukrainian POWs being executed in prison complexes in the Donbass, or any of these other terrible war crimes that have happened, the rape, the murders, or the just robbing of sovereignty and democracy away from the Ukrainian people, which has been hard fought for this. Hundreds of years Ukrainians have fought for sovereignty, even if that history is largely kind of wiped away. And so it's very weird for me to hear somebody who was able to understand the Irish fight for 800 years for freedom, but aren't able to understand fighting for 160 days so far for freedom in Ukraine. And this is different. We just need to like maybe cave here.
Our existence as Ukrainians is inconvenient for wide swaths of the political spectrum. Like the fact that we have an independent identity at all outside of Russia, outside of the former USSR, is just incredibly threatening to quite a few people. And when they say, when they pretend these anti-war, I should say with air quotes, stances are in the interests of like preserving life or whatever, buddy, we Ukrainians, we know what the best route to prevent suffering is. That's the one we're taking. If you want to prevent suffering, then you listen to the people suffering tell you what will resolve the situation. If you're not willing to do that, again, because you don't recognize Ukrainians as legitimate, you don't think we have agency, you don't think we're living, breathing humans with our own history, we're just all like Zeo Banderite Nazi automatons, apparently, then of course, like in that pretend worldview, the war is just a proxy battle and the people here don't matter, and the best thing to do would be to stop the senseless violence as soon as possible. But again, that's not only, that isn't just ignoring Ukrainians who tell you like that's fucking stupid. We are right now doing our best to prevent additional slaughter and additional suffering. You're also not listening to Russians who, I repeat, continuously say they want to commit a genocide of Ukrainians and who have taken actions to that extent. Like, you're not listening to either the country doing the invading or the country being invaded. You literally like invented your own argument in your own head and then are supporting that. And when that doesn't map to reality, you get these people get super offensive and they start accusing you of being an imperialist, NATO shill. Like, buddy, please touch grass. Like, please open your eyes and look at the physical world that exists and maybe talk to some of the other people in it.
I think, and I assume, you wanted to say something quick?
Yeah. I agree with that. I also wanted to pick up on a point you said a little while ago about sort of Russia taking advantage, essentially. Even if you are a person who thinks that there should be some kind of, Ukrainian rump state and that Russia should have these territories, which I'm not of the opinion of. But even if you do believe that, knowing Vladimir Putin, this isn't the kind of guy who would respond to disunity in his enemies by saying, oh yeah, I should pump the brakes now and negotiate now that I'm sensing that, the people I'm fighting, I foresee they'll have a weaker military. So even if you are taking the sort of, I don't want to say middle ground, the sort of the ground that leaves everyone unhappy, it wouldn't really make sense to support ceasing the sending of arms.
I would like to ask Lonerbox, as you're the person who's more familiar with British politics than probably anybody in this room, because you're a kilt-wearing Scot. I don't think Jeremy Corbyn is a bad person. In fact, I think that he generally has been on the right side of the vast majority of political issues, right? That's why, if I was British, from the little bit of knowledge I have of British politics, I probably would have voted for him over any, like, the Lib Dems or anybody else when he was leader of the Labour Party. But my assumption is here that he has a dedication to peace, that he sees war is bad, end war, which is like a basic thing for a lot of people. Like, a lot of people just have this base instinct to want to end war, right? And therefore the mega compromise kind of like papers come out and we got to do whatever is necessary to end the conflict because that's bad. But then I'll like see him like talk about like domestic politics, right? And what I get is like this idea of like, we need to fight in the trenches and not compromise on healthcare, the NHS, all these things, and And I'm like, yes, I agree with you. All those things are so important. We need to push harder and get everything we can and keep pushing afterwards and all this stuff. But then it like gets to international politics, to something where we're obviously on the right side when it comes to supporting Ukraine here. And he knows it. He supports Ukraine as well. But then all of a sudden he's like, well, let's not send them the weapons that they would need for leverage. If we stop sending them weapons, then they're going to have less leverage in any negotiations that could even possibly happen. So that's the thing that's bothering me so much here too. And so I it almost feels like there's like an inconsistency when it comes to like the willingness to like compromise when it comes to like a domestic issue. But foreign policy, you can give up a nation's sovereignty or sign thousands of people's death warrant and occupation.
It's inconsistent when it comes to foreign policy as well, when you think about other countries. Like, the idea that Ukraine should concede some parts of land in exchange for peace is like, can you imagine if that was applied to something like Palestine? Like, they would have a completely different position, right? Especially given that, like, one of the next stages, it looks like, of Israel's expansion of settlements is that they might end up annexing like up to 30% of the West Bank. And can you imagine if that happens? And then they say, oh, maybe we can do a two-state solution now, but that almost a third of the West Bank becomes ours because that's where the settlements are. Like, you'd think that was fucking insane. So yeah, it's weird that it's inconsistent even when it comes to as a foreign policy principle as well. And I think that's where the leftist problem of like, everything that America supports, we have to do the opposite, or at least we can't pick a side. Because I think the much more damaging thing with leftists isn't the ones who support Russia. There aren't really that many of them.
Not really.
It's the ones who condemn Russia with a huge but about how we shouldn't support Ukraine.
And this isn't even the first time Corbyn and his kind of group of advisors and friends and stuff have been this way. They had the exact same position in Syria. where they would constantly call for Assad to be like included in peace negotiations or cast doubt that a chemical attack was carried out by Assad. We need a quote unquote independent investigation.
Did he cast doubt on the chemical attack?
Yes, he suggested that there may have been other forces involved in a chemical attack on Duma, I believe. And he never elucidates on what those are. He just follows that up with a call for having needing to have an independent investigation to establish the truth. So it sounds like this kind of moderate like road, but like in reality, again, just like in Ukraine, his statements give cover to the Russians. On Syria, his statements gives cover to Assad and the Russians. So it's a very clear thorough line of having a decent outlook on domestic policy, though I think the like suggestions of the domestic left are not radical or strange. They are simply logical answers to the challenges that we face currently in the 21st century, coupled with just atrocious, basically carrying water for dictatorial regimes and foreign policy purely because it is not our side, which is a horrible way to build an ideology or have any kind of moral stance.
Yeah, I'm looking into this. It looks like he was basically calling for like an independent investigation. I don't think he ever said Assad didn't do it, but it was kind of like this like idea.
And that's what I mean. They say it in this very Weasley way, where it's like, and I'm sure we'll talk about the amnesty thing in a bit. But the current it's very much like amnesty does, where you kind of cast doubt on both sides and muddy what is a very clear, like, clear-cut moral issue of Assad's a butcher, Russia's a genocidal fascist empire. Like, these are not questionable propositions that you need to tease out the truth between the propaganda. This is pretty self-evident stuff.
I guess for me, right, when it comes to like, I don't think that Russia shouldn't be involved in negotiations. I didn't think Assad should ever not be involved in negotiations. But we also need to be like kind of clear cut about exactly what the requests would be and what would be willing to be compromised. When I hear somebody saying we should negotiate, my follow-up question is always, okay, what's your position? Because when somebody says we negotiate, what that always leads to me thinking is that they're just making a vague like gesture towards talking. I can negotiate with anyone. I can negotiate with Mitch McConnell. I can negotiate with George Bush. I can negotiate with Saddam Hussein. But if you don't lay clear at what your position is, then all you're saying is we should talk, which is like, thank you for the most basic level of political opinions, just saying we should talk. But what should the position be? And that's always where you get these types of people, like maybe possibly stuck up when it comes to Ukraine, because when you say, okay, what should be the negotiating position? What should be the position Ukraine doesn't move off of? Or what do you think Ukraine should actually give up, if you think they should give up anything? And then they're in a position that's like, well, I don't know. And there's usually not an answer to that, right? Because nobody wants to say, none of them really want to say, because they don't want to commit to saying they should give up territory, because that's an unbelievably unpopular and immoral stance.
It honestly is like it's been one of the most disheartening things for me personally, aside from the whole war part, is the complete well, not complete, I would say, but a very notable lack of solidarity, and I'm far from the only Ukrainian leftist to have expressed this position, especially lately, but like one of the tenets of socialism that I grew up with when I was a little baby Marxist was international solidarity. The idea that class struggle cuts across national borders. And as I've gotten older, I found that only to be more true as the world becomes more globalized, more interconnected, and multinational corporations completely detach themselves from any kind of national basis. That's only become more the case. And instead of finding the solidarity in this very obvious good guy versus bad guy situation in the Ukrainian conflict, instead you have people just straight up taking the fascist side of things and saying it's okay, all Ukrainians are Nazis, you can kill me. And it's like, you're supposed to be my comrade, like you're supposed to be someone I can rely on, and instead it's the exact opposite. Instead you find just like constant mockery, constant dismissal of Ukrainian voices and constant like whataboutism. What about Azov? What about Azov? Like, dude, what about Azov? There's like 30 or 40 million people in Ukraine. Azov's like a battalion of like, I don't know, like I don't even know how many people survived Mariupol at this point. It's not a large amount of people. You can like just claiming an entire group, an entire nation is Nazis with zero evidence is a pretty fashy fucking thing to do.
So I want to make sure that we've been going for almost like we've been going on for well over an hour now, so I want to make sure we can get through all the topics today. So next, I wanted to talk about possibly either the article. We could talk about the Vogue shoot next, or we could talk about
the article, I guess, the Iranian drone one.
Okay, we do the Iranian drone one. And I do want to make sure we get to Lonerbox's video on Hassan and like coverage of Ukraine online. I want to make sure we get to talk about that as well, because I feel like that was connected to a lot of what we were talking about. So could it be possible we do that quick and then we do the article, since it's all kind of like a singular stream of thought we're doing right here?
Yeah, and I mean we can even spend more time on Lonerboxes, because the article itself is pretty quick. You know, it's sort of a developing story still. So
okay,
yeah.
Dope. So Lonerbox, you released a video that got a reaction. What was it? How long has it been? Like 2 months, 3 months now?
2 months.
It's been 2 months since you released a video. Could you tell me about what that video was? It was about a well-known Twitch streamer, small-time content creator. Isn't that right?
Yeah. Forget his name. Hassan Pecker. He did so I knew that there were some viral clips of him going around saying like really weird things about Ukraine and Nazi comparisons and all that stuff. I'm very skeptical of like 10 to like 20, 30-second clips of people, so I tend to just kind of like let it slide. But it was when Adam Something made a video about the Gravel Institute's take on Ukraine, where he basically just described it as like a very partisan, like PragerU-esque video that was full of manipulation and very cherry-picked facts. And then Hassan responded to that response, and then a whole drama thing blew up between them. And I just decided like there's a 3.5-hour video here of Hassan like talking about Ukraine. So I just thought I'd watch the whole thing. And then just realizing from that, like one after another, just like this massive, like disconnected stream of like either just things that were completely false or very weird, like moral and ethical stances, or like weird interpretation of facts. And I just thought, whoa, like this is actually like the biggest left-wing streamer that has ever existed, just kind of like flailing in the void. So I just thought I would like document it. Like I think there was kind of like 4 or 5 parts, especially that I thought he just got it like very, very wrong. So yeah.
I wanted to ask you about a few of this. So Hassan Piker is probably the most popular. No, he is the most popular political Twitch streamer. Period. I mean, we're talking like hundreds of thousands of people watch every stream. Hundreds of thousands of people watch him on YouTube. You can, anytime you tune into stream, he's probably got like what 15 to 40,000 live viewers or something. Like he has a lot of people compared to the other political Twitch streamers, which are a lot smaller. And so he has a lot of people watching him. Can you tell me about like what his prediction was going into the conflict, considering how many people were looking to him for like news and updates and stuff like that?
Yeah. So the way I understand it is that U.S. intelligence initially said there's going to be an invasion. It's going to be in like middle of February. Some EU officials said we're not too sure, but we'll wait and see. The date that was kind of predicted had passed, but warnings were increasing. Since that date passed, Hassan was kind of like bragging about saying there's definitely not going to be a war. Like, and each day he kind of said like, oh, I'm just going to add another counter. Like, of course, there's no war in Ukraine. Of course, it hasn't happened. Like, fear mongering U.S. intel. Then obviously the invasion happened, and then he started shifting again, where he kind of said like, I was wrong about Ukraine, but then he went on to say, but they're still not going to attack Kiev, and they're still not going to bomb cities, and they're not going to kill civilians like en masse and shit. And then like, okay, well, all that happened as well. So when I got to the point where he was saying, "Don't worry, Russia's not going to nuke Ukraine," I was kind of like, "Whoa." Like,
Kind of, he was like a reverse 8-ball, and you were a little
I was like,
scared
oh
when he said
no,
that.
maybe it's gonna happen now as well. Yeah. So yeah, I think that was kind of like where the first kind of like scandal picked up. But then from then onwards, I think he was just kind of reading a lot of very biased and very misleading sources, and kind of like shoehorning the narrative into what his preconceived understanding of US foreign policy was, which was basically this very Cold War. If there's regime change somewhere else in the world, it must be because the CIA was trying to destroy socialism. If there is an invasion that the US is like getting involved in, then it must be that the other side has like has like some point maybe, although he's not pro Russia. Um, yeah, it was like it's kind of hard to kind of summarize exactly
Well,
where the kind of problem is because it's just one thing. It was just so
the
many
thing
different
is,
like
I
scattered
don't
thoughts. Yeah.
think, he's not a Vatnik, right? He's not like a
Mhm.
pro-Russia shill or something. He's not like under the delusion that Vladimir Putin's like a good guy and he's gonna bring back the Soviet Union. He knows he's an authoritarian. He knows he doesn't agree with his politics at all. So why do you think he was so confident that the nation wasn't going to get invaded? Now I know that it's been a while since this has all happened, but he still covers the war every once in a while. He's still a very
Mhm.
respected content creator, and a lot of people had this perception going into the war. So it's not just him. I think he's almost like the punching bag for this discussion, and I don't want that to be the case, but he's the most well-known example of this happening on the left on the internet. Why do you think there were so many people that were just so quickly to just completely discount the idea that Ukraine could be invaded? Do you think it was just a general distrust of U.S. intelligence?
Imagine not believing U.S. intel, cucks. But the problem is like, well, yeah, we grew up during the Iraq War. We grew up hearing from intelligence agencies that Saddam definitely had like weapons of mass destruction, and he was like building more. And then there's like that story about the trailer that was supposedly containing chemical weapons, and then you get there and it's just like building like basic artillery balloons. Or you hear about a report to British intelligence that was about these glass beads containing nerve agents that were aligned in like a series, and then you're like, wait, that's not actually real. That's from a film in 1996 called The Rock with Nicolas Cage, and this is in like intelligence reports. This was in the Chilcot inquiry. So yeah, of course you can doubt U.S. intelligence, but yeah, I think it's taking what is a reasonable position. I think doubt is fine, but taking it to this like obscene level of confidence was the problem, right? Like,
I think it's honestly, to me, the most surprising part of this is not that he got things wrong. It's that these people make like these predictions about how the Ukrainian war is going to go, and they don't consult Ukrainians at all. They don't look at like what Ukrainians are writing. They don't read English language Ukrainian media. They don't like follow English speaking Ukrainians on social media. Like our participation in these things, where you would think usually, right, if you get news about a place, the best way to find out what happened there is to call someone who was there and ask them about it. Like, what did you see? What do you think? And that step is just completely skipped, and it's purely, well, U.S. intelligence says. Who the fuck cares what U.S. intelligence says? Talk to a Ukrainian. Ask us. It's our country that's getting invaded.
I think a lot of people pointed to Zelenskyy saying he didn't think that an invasion was going to happen, and say so.
Why are you relying on state sources? Like, you can again just talk to normal Ukrainians on social media. You can read Ukrainian news. Like, you don't have to just rely on, like, states are not the arbiters of fucking information, and Zelenskyy and the Ukrainian government is not the arbiter of what Ukrainians think. It's such a colonial attitude that it drives me crazy. They would never do this about like a Ukraine like they would never do this about some disaster in a US state. They wouldn't say, well, the state government says this. No, they would fucking call someone from that state and ask them, hey, what's going on? But when it comes to Ukraine, other like foreign countries, just despite the fact that we have the internet and there's plenty of people who speak English all over the world, that is just completely disregarded. Just does not matter. And this, I saw this very well with the Taiwan situation. Just tons of Americans just opining, this is good, this is bad, this is good, this is bad. How about asking the Taiwanese what they think? Why they, like, well, what does the left in Taiwan think? What does the right think? What is the central opinion? How do Taiwaners see it overall? Nope, just only care about what the Western media says. It is so incredibly arrogant and colonial. It just drives me insane.
I do think it's good to be skeptical of what an intelligence report from a country which has, of course, a biased position on any geopolitical issue is going to say, but to also completely disregard it is silly. You should take note of it, but also knowing exactly where the source comes from. If Russian intelligence says something, I'm not just going to be like, well, Russia says, fuck it, right? I'm going to listen to what they're saying, look at the other factors involved, and see if it lines up with the reality on the ground or what other independent sources are saying. And it wasn't just U.S. intelligence that was saying this. There was also just the physical movement of Russian soldiers to get into a position to invade that was also pushing it towards it. Now, my position right before the invasion happened, and I said it was almost like a coin flip, it was going to happen or not. Once I saw the soldiers were in place and they were in positions to invade, and they shipped blood over to specifically like give blood transfers if somebody actually was like bleeding out if they got shot, which is something you don't usually do during training exercises, which was the Russian claim here. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that if you're an American, you kind of feel like the center of the world a little bit, you know? Like you are the most powerful country in the world, the richest country in the world, and most foreign policy conflicts in the world, from an American's perspective, you just see America on one side and whatever is on the other side. And so if you ask most Americans about the Iran-Iraq war, and we were even involved in that, like they will have no clue what you're talking about, right? We were involved in that to some degree. We're giving intelligence to the Iraqis. We did do that. But if you go to other foreign conflicts that we were not involved in, or not directly involved in, a lot of Americans will completely just be like, I have no clue what you're talking about. A lot of Americans don't even know the Korean War happened, and you're going to expect them to know about the last 8 years in the Donbass? Like, and so for a lot of American political commentators, they don't know about what happened in Chechnya and Grozny. They don't know about what happened in Georgia. They don't know about the last 8 years. They don't know about what the annexation of Crimea, or they just didn't pay attention, or they've just kind of like let it fade to the back of their mind. And so when this idea came about, I guess a lot of them, I think Hasanabe actually said this on his stream recently when China was like shooting missiles over Taiwan in response to an 82-year-old woman visiting the island. Man, a lot of countries are acting like America recently. And I was like, there it is. I was like, okay, well that kind of underlines the analysis, doesn't it?
I think it's also like a lot of like, especially Hassan's positions when it came to Ukraine were just like American exceptionalism, but from the left. So the idea, going with the idea that NATO like aggravated Russia, and that's kind of why the invasion happened. Or I think the worst thing that I remember was his take on the Euromaidan, when he was actually like, because if you went to Hassan's stream around 2 or 3 months ago and wanted to know what was going on in the Euromaidan, you'd be hearing about CIA-backed far right snipers who were seen shooting at both sides.
Wait, did he actually wait, can I ask you a question? Did he actually say far right US backed snipers?
Yeah, it's in my video.
Like, does he go straight in? I don't remember this.
He went into
did he go into the whole
Olga.
Did he go into the whole phone call with the American? Oh god.
Yeah, the Olga
That is,
Volga
and again,
phone call.
that's
Yeah.
literally
bad.
straight up
That's
Russian
really
propaganda.
bad.
And that goes into this whole like media ecosystem that the Russians built. That's why, like, it's one thing if a random like dude in the street doesn't know anything, but if you are someone with a platform this large and you are this influential and you are literally spreading Russian propaganda designed to enable genocide, guess what? You are a collaborator. You are a fascist collaborator. You might not want to be, you might not think you are, but you, in that role, sharing that information, you are a goddamn fascist collaborator.
I think a better term would probably be useful idiot, because I don't think Hassan's a fascist, but I think a useful idiot might be the more appropriate term. You know what I mean? I just don't. I mean, like I want to be careful with the word fascist, because there's a stark difference between the Proud Boys and Hasanabe.
I mean, you can understand it.
He's definitely a collaborator. Like that's what sharing this crap does. If you like really listen to this and you reshare it and you believe the outlandish fucking claims, and again, you've never talked to Ukrainian in your goddamn life because we're all Nazis and we're all fake anyway. From my perspective as a Ukrainian, there's no other word for you. Like, I don't think you're a useful idiot. A useful idiot keeps his mouth shut, or at the very least, a useful idiot would not be so confident. They might say, "Oh, I heard," or "there were rumors that," blah blah blah. But to just say this as established fact, I'm sorry, you've passed that level where I can ascribe to you incompetence instead of malice.
I think I wouldn't underestimate just how like clever that piece of Russian propaganda was, though, because they know what Western leftists like believe in, right? They know that when it comes to foreign policy and regime change, they have like all these stories in their pocket about the CIA funding the far right to cause a revolution. So when you hear like all that, all you need is a phone call with a doctor called Olga Bulga picking up some bullets and saying these don't match the police, and it's like, oh wow, yeah, of course, it must have been the CIA trained far right operatives. Yeah, yeah, I do hesitate a little bit with the fascist thing because I feel like if you are like just a kind of like not very critically thinking left winger, like that will fit your preconceived theory like very well. Um, but yeah, it's really unfortunate because to me, like, yeah, to me that is like whether you're doing it accidentally or negligently or whatever, like yeah, you're pushing like a Kremlin conspiracy theory. Like that theory was spread by Lavrov. Like that's where it came from. So yeah.
I mean, Russia is very good at like kind of twisting, especially if you're an American, and I think you're totally right, Romeo, that Americans don't. We're very self-absorbed, and to a certain extent, I live in the UK. There's a little bit of that in Britain, sort of legacy stuff. When you're that self-absorbed, and other countries don't have agency, and especially if you grew up in sort of the shadow of Iraq, right, where there was a big betrayal by traditional intelligence, traditional media sources, and things like that. The Russians can come in and say, oh, in the same way that, Lockheed Martin and Halliburton and all these things were pushing a narrative for you to go in Iraq. That's what's happening. That's what's happening here. And Americans are a lot more susceptible to it just because, it's part of that sort of that arrogance and that self-absorption and those sorts of dynamics. It also happens, elsewhere in the world as well. Russia's very effective in sub-Saharan Africa at sort of taking legitimate sort of decolonial movements and movements that are sort of upset with how with the neo-imperial tactics of France and other Western countries, and saying, oh, you should support us, Russia, because we're also opposed to that. Even though obviously, Russia's interested in doing a lot of the same things as France, and to a certain extent, worse things. So yeah, you're right about that.
Loner, what do you think needs to be done going forward on this? Because I remember giving a, this feels like the criticize Hasanabi are. I remember giving a criticism of Hasanabi's analysis about Taiwan back in the day and getting a lot of pushback. And a lot of those criticisms are now seeming very relevant right now when it comes to our aid that we were providing to Taiwan and defending itself from Chinese aggression, which was in line with the Taiwanese Relations Act from 1979. This isn't going to be the last war, and this war isn't even over. This might not be the last war Ukraine ever faces. This is most certainly not going to be the last war that the world ever faces. Taiwan is under threat right now. There are other nations that are going to be under threat of invasion in the future. There's a possibility of violence is already breaking out right now over Nagorno-Karabakh between Armenia and Azerbaijan. There are the Syrian civil war, while semi-frozen, is still ongoing. What do American left-wingers need to do to prepare for a future where the United States is not the only country that can invade other countries unjustly?
I really don't know. I feel like it's difficult because if you are someone who wants alternative, like if you're someone who's online looking for politics, it's because you're looking for something alternative. And the problem with alternative is you're looking for a lot of things that might probably just be incorrect or massively exaggerated. So it's difficult to navigate that space because as soon as you start saying, well, actually, this very tempting and seductive and extreme narrative is complete bullshit, then you are the thing that they came on the internet to get away from. You're mainstream media. You're the establishment. You're a shill.
Bingo. You've hit it right on the nail. You've hit the nail right on the head, actually. I've been trying to figure out how to articulate that for a while, and you said it perfectly.
Cool. I don't know.
Cool.
Yeah, it's hard. I don't know. Make videos. I suppose maybe. I don't know. I feel like I can do this in conversations with these because I've had a lot of conversations about Ukraine specifically with like very far left leaning people. It's always helpful to kind of meet them where they are in that situation. It's like, yes, we're not saying the US doesn't fuck around. We know, like all the examples of Iran, Chile, Nicaragua, El Salvador, but it's like at the same time, you need to actually have like reality on your side,
I think one of the most important things is honestly kind of what we're doing now is building like actual international solidarity, is having networks of personalities, of content creators, of commentators who live in the parts of the world where stuff is happening. So when stuff happens, you have a semi-reliable local voice to listen to and then disseminate that instead of, you know, just anti saying the truth is whatever the United States, the opposite of whatever the US is saying. Like to actually have an international, like, I don't know, international solidarity, again, what a concept, is talking to people affected by these conflicts. And this isn't like a new concept. It drives me crazy because all the time you'll see people in the US especially like talking about mutual aid programs, and we'll be like, well, you know, like this like state program or this federal program isn't really helpful because it doesn't actually address the like needs of the community where this like tragedy or where this disaster or where this epidemic or whatever is occurring. And we need to like listen to people in the community because obviously they know like what is best and they probably know how to fix their own situation better than anyone else could. That applies anywhere you go, not just in the US. You can, like, Taiwan, great, talk to Taiwanese leftists. They will tell you what the problems are, who the players are. They'll tell you what they think. Then you'll have a much better understanding of the conflict there than listening to literally anyone else. Same goes from Ukraine and Syria and Palestine, Timor-Leste. Like, it just talk to local people. Everyone's online now. That's the best way to kind of detox yourself from any state propaganda at all, whether it's coming from like the West or it's coming from Russia or China or whatever, is if actually talk to people who live in those places. And then you'll find out that the world is actually a lot more nuanced and complicated than like the like Saturday morning cartoon morality that you might ascribe to.
Okay, so I think I do want to move on because I do want to get the input of our wonderful Warhammer 40K fan, and I want to talk about an article you wrote. Could you tell me a little bit about the article?
Yeah. So just a bit of background. There's two articles. The first one is a little less relevant. I had written for the Daily Beast on the Ukrainian kamikaze drone attack on the oil refinery. That was, I guess, a month and a half ago now, maybe 2 months ago. And what I'd written at the time was because of my experience watching the conflict in Yemen. I was talking about how sort of that conflict where the Houthis were using one-way attack drones or suicide drones or kamikaze drones, however you want to say it, that was very costly for Saudi Arabia because it would hit oil infrastructures. Ukraine could also do that against Russia, or at least it was sort of a potential given that attack had happened. A couple weeks later, my sort of experience comes up again, and I write for the Daily Beast again because the news came out, and this is another, we were just talking about U.S. intelligence, but Jake Sullivan, who's the U.S. National Security Advisor, came out and said, there's a deal on the table between Iran and Russia where Iran would supply hundreds, is what he said, of drones to Russia. Now, there was kind of a lot of confusion at this, for several reasons. There was sort of, on the one end of the spectrum, there was like hysteria that sort of, oh my gosh, this is a massive increase to Russian capabilities. On the other end of the spectrum, there was sort of a, who cares? Like, what, Iran has a drone program, what? And I sort of wrote my article to kind of advance two arguments. The first is that, Iran actually has a pretty successful drone program. They've sort of, they've captured U.S. drones before. They've put a lot of effort into sort of, building a drone program, and they have, dozens of different kinds. And this is sort of, you can see this on, Oryx, the site that tracks all the Russian losses. They also have a, Iran drone handbook you can look at. And they have all different kinds of drones that range from sort of the more capable drones you think of when you think of drones, like a predator drone looking thing, to sort of a simple kamikaze one-way attack drone, a lot like a Switchblade, but perhaps with a larger payload and a longer range. And so the other argument I advance in it is that ultimately this isn't probably going to have that big of an impact strategically. Tactically, it might, but it really depends on what Iran sends. If Iran is sending hundreds of drones, it's probably not as likely that they're going to be sending tons of their most advanced things, because their most advanced drones, because they need their most advanced drones for their own military operations. It's more likely that you would see these sort of smaller, less capable drones. And this is where what Jake Sullivan said was really important, because he said these were some of the drones that were being sent to Russia were ones that Iran had sent to Yemen. And the ones that were sent to Yemen are either, the sort of one-way attack drones.
So we're talking about the same weapons that they were sending to the Houthi rebels in Yemen.
So I think he said like what was sent in Yemen.
Now that doesn't mean the second most powerful military in the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and that doesn't. The phrasing was kind of vague. I think he meant that some of them would be that kind of drone. I think it's likely that you're going to see some of the more advanced ones as well. There was actually later the U.S. released actual satellite imagery of the Iranians showing off to a Russian delegation two particular models, which are the Shahed 129 and the Shahed 191. That there's going to be a lot of numbers in this, but those are more like predator drones. They fly around and they can do ISR, your intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance stuff, and drop a bomb, as opposed to just being a sort of kamikaze Switchblade kind of deal. It's sort of a wait and see. And I mean, ultimately, what they send could be an indicator of what Russia's lacking, right? If Iran is sending a lot of sort of the more typical reconnaissance drones, you could say, oh, that means they're struggling to sort of replace the Orlan 10s that they've lost, for their artillery scouting.
They've been losing a lot of those Orlan 10s to Ukrainians just shooting them down, not only with traditional munitions, which we've seen a lot of rebels in Syria and other places try to shoot down drones with traditional munitions, but also with these anti-drone guns, which I think a lot of people are becoming familiar with these anti-drone guns for the first time in this war. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I don't know too much about anti-drone guns. My understanding is that they jam the signal from the drone to the operator. If that's the case, if they don't have on the drone, if they don't have the sort of autopilot, return to, it'll just keep going where it's going, or it'll crash.
How much do these drones, or could these drones really augment Russian tactical capabilities? I mean, they already can shoot calibers from the Caspian Sea, from their missile cruisers on the Black Sea, from they can already hit any target in Ukraine with missiles, and we've seen them do that pretty precisely as well, not just randomly. So how much could these drones realistically help or assist the Russians that much if they already have comparable capabilities?
Yeah, I don't think it augments their capabilities. I think it's an attempt it's like a stopgap. It's more of an attempt to replace the capabilities they already have. In terms of ISR, on a tactical level, it might be more of an augment, because my understanding is the Orlan 10 is not a very good system. But in terms of long range strikes, so the one of the most famous kind of drone sent to Yemen is long range one way attack, and that's essentially just a really slow tiny cruise missile. That's just a worse version of what Russia has, right? Which are cruise missiles and precision targets. It could be sort of problematic, I guess, in insufficient numbers, but to be frank, I don't think hundreds are sufficient numbers. Now, if it's hundreds every year, or hundreds, over the course of, there's multiple shipments or something, or if it sort of presages, because Iran does have its own ballistic missile program as well. If there was some kind of, indication that they were sending those, that would be a little bit more concerning. But this is more I think it more demonstrates that Russia is short of ISR, short of precision strike capabilities, than it is that they're suddenly going to be a lot better.
That's what I wanted to ask about. Do you think they're trying to supplement their own losses, or do you think they're trying to expand their capabilities?
I think I do think it's supplementing losses. I mean, I think if Russia could produce, drones of that quality themselves, they'd be doing it.
As we know, Russian sanctions against Russia have basically shut down their advanced manufacturing capability. They were entirely reliant on the West, specifically German tool-making equipment in particular, and most of that is computer controlled. So once Germany pulled the licenses and stopped providing them access, Russia's advanced manufacturing capability now is basically zero. Yeah. They can't really easily replace, right? Their all this smart and precision munitions that they're using. They can't really easily replace that. So I imagine this Iranian deal is an attempt to kind of stopgap that.
Yeah, and also, I mean, and I'm just speculating here, but Iran's been under sanctions for an incredibly long amount of time themselves. So it is always possible that, they could potentially collaborate on some kind of smuggling. And I mean, for drones in particular, it's not, you don't quite need as much advanced stuff as you would for, a more capable military system. I think there's definitely bottlenecks, right, with chips and sort of especially guidance systems as well. But if Iran essentially, Iran's been able to get around, these things themselves. And by providing this to Russia, Russia doesn't, at least in the short term, doesn't need to worry as much about, getting their UAV production back up.
Do you think some people have made the argument that this shows like a wider? Do you think this is like a sign of? Some people are trying to say this like a sign of like the starting of a multipolar order, or this is like an ideological move. That this is like, and I do need to bring this up because I've seen this narrative push about this. That the idea that this is going to be the start of wider cooperation between Russia and Iran when it comes to weapons deals, economics deals, definitely as the West tries to box them out economically, and it's going to be much harder for them to get a lot of Western tech that they were using to modernize the military that's no longer available due to sanctions. Do you think we're going to see more cooperation between Russia and Iran and to try to break up the American hegemonic order?
I don't think it's, I think a lot of people, this is sort of going back to what you're saying about like Tom Clancy novels. It's not necessarily like a grand conspiracy necessarily. This deal in particular seems a lot more like opportunism. Russia traditionally, when they've bought drones, they've bought them from Israel. So and no one else is really interested in selling them drones. Turkey's not going to give them drones. The US isn't going to give them drones. I guess China isn't going to give them drones, and that leaves you with Iran as the only really alternative power that has a drone program capable of sort of meeting their needs. Now, could they potentially collaborate more? Yeah, but I don't think it would be like an axis of evil type situation as much as some people in the US, some neocons might be salivating over that kind of idea.
It's more like the last kid in the playground that doesn't think you're a weird creep.
Yeah, it's like that SNL sketch where there's only two people left in the bar, right? And they're trying to find things they like about each other, and it doesn't really matter.
We're both here and sitting at the bar.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there have been rumors about I think it was Forbes, which is kind of a strange source for this sort of thing, but they claimed that there was like they were going to swap. Iran was going to send drones and Russia was going to send Su-35s, which is sort of a little out there, a little Tom Clancy-ish, if you ask me. Not the least because Su-35s cost many, many more times what drones do. So yeah, this is another instance where I think there's a lot of rumor and there's sort of a contested information environment. So it's sort of yeah. I think people are blowing things out of proportion sometimes.
Okay, well, I wanted to bring that up because I saw a lot of noise about the story, so I saw you wrote a really good article about it. Is there any updates recently to the story that you wanted to bring up? I've heard that there is some intelligence coming out, or supposedly, everything needs to be confirmed, that some of these drones have been delivered to Russia?
Yeah, I saw. Yeah, I saw some tweets and some Ukrainian news sources that and I think it was, I think they were quoting one of the advisors to the president, but I didn't look too deeply into it. So if that's not the case, but they were essentially saying that there were some in operation. I'm not sure about that. I don't know. Like I'll believe it when I see it. Essentially, there's a lot of obstacles that Russia would face to actually deploying Iranian drones, not the least of which would be the language gap, getting used to operating them, that sort of thing. And if there was one, I think, think tank assessment that was suggesting that maybe Iranians would go to Ukraine and operate these for the Russians, which I think is I think we'd notice. Like a lot of rumors about different North Koreans and other forces fighting in Ukraine. I think we notice if they're Iranian. So I think it's a wait and see. I more or less believe the intelligence assessment that they might be sent over, or at least that Jake Sullivan and sort of his assessments, they didn't really have a particular reason to lie about that. So.
I see a lot of stories coming out. I mean, like during the start of the war, immediately when Russia, everybody realized how much of manpower is going to be an issue for the Russian military. We saw stories like we're going to see all these Syrian fighters from the from Assad's army come over. We're going to see Libyan mercenaries, or we're going to see this, we're going to see that. I think the most recent story I heard from the grapevine was 100,000 North Korean troops are going to arrive and save the Russian army. Why do we keep seeing this stuff? Like, I mean, I'm not saying that it's impossible for other global powers who want to make this as difficult for the United States or NATO or Ukraine as possible won't get involved to some degree, but we keep seeing these like predictions that we're gonna see like 50,000 troops. It's like these wild stories or stuff. Is there any like truth to anything that's being shouted from the top of like these people trying to play chess, so they're gonna send their army or a bunch of resources to help Russia here because they don't like America and NATO, and this is gonna help like break up this kind of global order that America's made, in their view?
Yeah, I mean, is there any truth to it? I mean, I guess it's sort of on a case by case basis. My understanding for the North Korean thing was that some guy on Russian TV said that North Korea had offered laborers to Russia, which is my understanding is that's a fairly common thing that North Korea does, is they'll send laborers. I think they sent some.
And then the grapevine turns it into 100,000 soldiers, and
yeah, and then it becomes the New York, and then it went to the New York Post, and then it went to the British tabloid sites. I think it went to the Mail, and then it goes from there. I think also there's also, I mean, Russia's looking right for auxiliaries. Right, early on they went to Kazakhstan and they were like, "Give us soldiers," and Kazakhstan was like, "No." So it really is a case by case basis. I mean, even the Wagner kind of rumors didn't play out that much. There was a lot of rumors early in the conflict that Wagner was just going to quit their various deployments and head straight to Ukraine, and we've seen that a little bit. Wagner guys who fought in Libya keep turning up dead in Ukraine, but it's not to the scale people expected. So I think it's more likely that Russia's kind of going to be at war with the forces they have. I don't think there's going to be there's not going to be a like the end of the second Lord of the Rings movie is some other army popping up.
I mean, even the Chechens, which is a constituent part of Russia, the Russians themselves complained that all of Kadyrov's troops, this Chechen warlord Kadyrov's troops, they nicknamed them TikTok soldiers. Like, not the Ukrainians didn't do this, the Russians did this. Because these guys would come in, act badass, like take photos literally for TikTok, and then leave. Or they would, like, Russian troops would go take a position, take insane losses, like barely grab it, and then all the Chechens would roll into this already secured position and act like they did all of this. So they're not even getting that much help from parts of their own military, much less other people's. Like, I think I've seen maybe a dozen reports of Syrians in Ukraine, and those are also unconfirmed. So it seems I really would not put stock in, like, if people wanted to help Putin, they would be helping Putin, I think is the takeaway here.
It kind of feels like a lot of these reports are like 90% of these reports that come out, like breaking news, new military development, and it's not from like a source that's reputable, or it's just from like weird internet form, 90% of them end up not being true. It's like, for example, every week we'll see, and a lot of them, this is from the Russian government though, they'll say, we just took out a HIMAR. And then they'll show a blurry video that looks like the Bigfoot or Loch Ness Monster footage where a rocket hits the third story of an apartment building. It's like, and we're supposed to believe that there was a HIMAR stuffed into the window there. Or it's like, or I think one of the photographs that were posted was literally from a video game. I think it was like one of the Commander Conquer video games. So it was like a truck on fire from that video game. Another one that was posted, a photograph, was just of a truck, but not with the HIMAR attachment that you actually need to do the thing. It's like, we keep like, and you gotta really wait till this stuff gets confirmed before you start panicking, because as far as I know, like, the Pentagon has completely denied any HIMAR has been destroyed, and we have yet to see any evidence of any HIMAR being destroyed. But every week we hear a new like report of it. Eventually, I think it'll probably happen, because, you know, if they keep using them, eventually it'll happen. But the longer Ukraine can go without them being destroyed, the better. And the Russians haven't been able to figure out the counter battery fire yet, so no, haven't taken it out. But we keep seeing these unconfirmed reports of that as well. And so just like a big advice to everybody listening is just wait for everything to be confirmed. Wait for everything to be confirmed. Just because it was posted on Twitter doesn't mean it's real. Okay.
Especially if the Twitter account is called Breaking News World Report.
Yeah, breaking news, real news, double truthful news. Yep. So, okay. Next I wanted to talk about two stories, and I wanted to connect these stories because I wanted to show like the differences in outrage, right? You guys remember the Vogue shoot with Zelenskyy's wife and him? You guys remember the reaction this got? You know this, Loner, what I'm talking about, the Vogue shoot?
Yeah.
So there was a shoot of Zelenskyy's wife and Zelenskyy done by Vogue magazine, where they took a bunch of photos of him and his wife, and they posted it on their magazine cover, posting a bunch of photos of them, and it was like an interview that they did along with it. And I saw there was like a huge backlash to it. That was like, wow, your country gets invaded and you think it's appropriate for you to pose for Vogue magazine? You think it's appropriate to pose for this magazine interview? It's very similar to the reaction Zelenskyy got when he does a speech at like the Oscars or somewhere that's not specifically like the Academy of War and Death and Destruction and War Crimes location, or like if he's speaking anywhere that's not like from a bunker, right? Or he's not somewhere speaking that's about, it's like 20 dead kids that got blown up by the Russian military, then it seems that people feel it's inappropriate. A very similar reaction when there was some people from Kiev actually relaxing on the beach. People was like, oh, I thought there was a war going on. And so I wanted to get you guys' thoughts on this idea of kind of like Ukraine's being inappropriate as a wartime state with how it conducts itself, either by having people vacation or by its leader doing Vogue interviews and Vogue photo shoots to bring attention to the war.
It's crazy to think how easily people will adopt really far-right arguments. The reaction to that Vogue shoot of like, oh, I thought there was a war happening. How similar is that to right-wingers when they see a refugee who has an iPhone coming on so they've arrived in a boat where you've got like a 1 in 20 chance of dying, but they stick their hand in their pocket and there's a phone comes out and you're like, oh, wait a minute. Are you really suffering? It's like, oh, what the fuck? But yeah, it's just, these are like these are not left-wing or like, yeah, these are far right talking points. I don't know why.
I feel like that a lot of people kind of view Ukraine almost like it has to be like 9/11 every day, as in every city, every town needs to constantly be like crawling through blood. I remember the Norm Macdonald skit, blood and bones through the streets trying to get to their loved ones. And if they're not constantly digging out the bodies of dead children from rubble, then is it really a real war? Right? But if you look at any war throughout history, having high morale, vacations, birthdays, parties, these types of things still happen, especially in countries that are so large like Ukraine, right? This isn't Luxembourg, where it's like one city, and so if there's a war in Luxembourg, like everybody kind of is constantly experiencing every aspect of it. Like it's kind of like almost like an off and on type thing in many areas, where for a few hours you're just having dinners with friends, and then the sirens happen, you know, the restaurant closes down, and now you have to deal with that. Or maybe once a month there'll be a missile strike that kills people in the city you're located in. This is if you're in a place like Lviv, or if you're in Kiev, or if you're one of these locations. But if you're
literally in Vinnytsia, which we had that exact situation happen. And Vienna is typically considered safe. Everyone is like, it's summer now. Girls are out in sundresses, and people are sitting at roadside cafe, like street side cafes, and drinking and chatting and laughing. And I don't know, less than a month ago, a missile hit one of the central intersections of the city and killed like God knows how many people. At this point, I think over 100 injured, and yeah, it was horrifying. Everyone was basically shocked for 2 days. The city was in mourning, and then life goes on because what else are you gonna do? Like what the hell else are you gonna do?
I think what they expect is like every time you see a Ukrainian, they're just like, again, like just digging through rubble and stuff. But Ukraine's a big country, it has a lot of different people, and people still want to try to the best of their ability to go about their everyday lives. And if they don't, then that's going to be a difficult. Remember, like, it's very easy for Americans to understand, like, don't let the terrorists win. Keep on living. Keep on going to restaurants. Don't let those Al Qaeda motherfuckers win. But then it's like Ukraine. It's like, why don't you like constantly just in a bunker at all hours of every day? And you went to a restaurant today? That seems inappropriate if your nation's at war. But like, I mean, America was at war after 9/11, and you didn't wait 20 years before going to Starbucks, you motherfucker. But you expect the Ukrainians to do that? Like, I don't know. It's wild. Like, yeah, there's more than just like Kramatorsk. There's more than just like the very frontline cities. It's a large country, and people are going to be living in different conditions depending upon which part of the country they're living in, and if the city's being currently struck at that time or if it's not.
And even like frontline cities like Kharkiv, like I have a friend of mine who's a reporter based out of Kharkiv, and she constantly is like sharing pictures of, look, like there's people like going to the market. There's like, here's a photo of like people having coffee and looking out their window at the plumes of smoke from like a high rise that was just hit by a missile. And like, this is a city that's literally under shelling every day because you need to do something. You have to stay sane in some way. And especially if you're a civilian, you have much less access to information that soldiers might have, for example. A lot of what you get, because Ukrainians don't really trust their government that much. We like Zelenskyy at the moment, but historically, our trust in government is like zero, negative. We actively distrust everything the government says. So we are not sure if things are going well, if the military is telling the truth about how the offensives or counteroffensives are going. We like to think it's going well, but no one knows. But in order to keep yourself like active and not just, crawl up into a little ball and cry 24/7, you need to build some semblance of normality. You have to build some semblance of a normal life. Or as Dylan, as you put it, terrorists win.
Yeah, exactly. Or this time it's just the Vatnik terrorists.
Yeah.
I think there's also this element of like, I think at least for the American public, they're used to seeing Zelenskyy in that one very specific context, right? Of like him in the selfie, right, in the presidential palace, giving very stern proclamations, or when he was or when he talked to a joint session of Congress, and he showed all the footage and stuff like that. And so I think for a sort of a less informed section of the population, there was like a whiplash, right? When they saw him in Vogue, because that was sort of I don't know, maybe they just weren't thinking about it or stuff like that. I think it was a different, he was portrayed in a different way. And I mean, it was a profile of his wife. It wasn't a profile of him. But I think that might have been where there was some dissonance as well, beyond general misconceptions about how modern war is fought, right?
I mean, I hate to to trudge myself into Ukrainian politics, because anytime I give an opinion versus about Petro Poroshenko versus Zelenskyy, like every Ukrainian in the room gives me the demon eyes. But I do want to bring up that this is what I prefer Zelenskyy doing, and from every Ukrainian I've talked to, this is what they would prefer Zelenskyy to do. Zelenskyy isn't like a master strategist. He's not like somebody who went to the best military academies of the world. He's gonna be like, like a certain Austrian painter in the bunker, like, okay, we're gonna do this counteroffensive. Like that, there's a reason that people that's notorious
Comedian.
when we talk about that Austrian painter. Yeah, he's a comedian. He should lean into what his skills are, and his best skill is he's very well media trained. He has a history of working it for TV shows and movies and Dancing with the Stars and knowing how to do interviews and knowing how to promote stuff. And so he's a promoter more than anything. And one of the things that is keeping Ukraine alive and their fight for liberation and freedom alive is the international press covering them so heavily and making it so the public has been pressuring their governments to support Ukraine. And the governments who don't, you are seeing like their popularity slightly go down. I mean, the SPD in Germany, which even if Olaf Scholz in Germany has upped their support for Ukraine, and I'm happy to see that, a lot of the damage almost feels like it's been done, even if I still think they could make more progress. And so I think that it's good that he's doing this. It's good to see him at the Oscars. It's good to see him in Vogue. It's good to see him taking any mic that he'll put in front of himself, because his main thing right now is being a promoter for the Ukrainian struggle. And if somebody's going to put a mic in his face, I think he should speak into it, because he's using every tool at his disposal to try to keep his nation alive. And he's not going to pretend that he's somebody he isn't and pretend to be the best Napoleonic era general who's going to push the Russians back to Moscow. He's going to leave the strategy and the day-to-day war to the professionals, and he's going to leave the figurehead position, the media interviews, and the leadership qualities that he does have to himself, because that's what he's good with, and that's what he's supposed to do as a leader of the country. But I think some people just expect him to have like a helmet, get in a tank, and charge into battle or something, or to constantly just be like moving dead bodies out of the way on film.
I just wonder how these guys would have reacted if they saw like the football matches that happened in no man's land, like in the first year of World War One. You know, like it's just like it stinks of privilege to like take that approach, that unless you're like running around with battle scars and like what your left leg is just kind of dangling by a thread. Like, okay, I mean, like I can even look back to this personally of like being half Lebanese, is like during the Israeli bombing of Beirut in the mid 2000s, like when people in my family had to get evacuated to come to the UK, like my grandmother didn't want to leave. The entire city is getting shelled, but my grandmother like still wanted to stay because UK is cold, you know? Um, but if you ever like go to any of these countries where it's just like a fact of life, like it's so normal just to have like, I think I always get the story from my relatives of like just not long after I was born, the Lebanese civil war had just ended. And we actually went to Lebanon, and apparently the war had ended, but by the time we arrived there, the PLO were fighting with the Lebanese government, like just like an hour south of Beirut. And it's like, so there's like sirens going off and people having to like run from the plane into the airport so that you had shelter, and then like a shell going off like and shattering a few of the windows of the room we were in and shit like that. But it's like people were just kind of like, you know, just drinking coffee and chilling, you know, when that was happening. So it's like, yeah, it's such a normal thing of like countries that have wars going on to just try to live normally as much as you can.
I remember, well, I don't remember this, but I do want to bring this up, that this isn't the first time something like this has been done. Actually, Charles de Gaulle had a very similar photo shoot with his wife in 1941 after the Nazis took over France. And it was, do you want to imagine what it was for? It wasn't for just leisure and having fun. It was to bring up the struggle for free and independent France, free of Nazi and German occupation. And he just wanted to be in front of any camera that would allow him to talk about the need to liberate France. And this is somebody who has an actual military background, so doing stuff like this. Zelenskyy doesn't. Zelenskyy doesn't have a military background, and he's much more media trained than somebody like Charles de Gaulle. So I would expect to see somebody like Zelenskyy doing it even more than Charles de Gaulle did it. And if Charles de Gaulle, the person who helped liberate France, can do it, then I think Zelenskyy can do it, and he shouldn't be getting the shade that he's getting. Not to mention, the amount of outrage that got is so disproportionate to the other things that are happening in Ukraine right now that deserve outrage. I mean, like 1 week after all this outrage for the Vogue photo shoot happened, a video was leaked of a Russian soldier castrating a Ukrainian prisoner of war on film, boot on the head, castrating him. You can see every second of it. It's very gruesome footage. I'm not going to show it on screen when this is shown when this is posted on YouTube. I warn people before they look it up that it's extremely gruesome footage. That's I can't protect you from that. That got not nearly as much outrage as the Vogue photo shoot did, because that didn't really align with the idea of, oh, look at Zelenskyy, this faker or whatever. It didn't align with this idea of it almost felt like they wanted to say, look at this fake war, they're kind of scamming us, the Ukrainians. 1 week later, Ukrainian prisoner of war getting castrated on film. 1/10 of the outrage was produced outside of this photo shoot. It was, honestly, it's disgusting. It's disgusting.
I wonder if it's because people at some level like expect this horrid shit to happen in war. So when it does, they're like, "Oh well, it's a war. Bad shit happens." So yeah, one guy castrated another guy on camera. It's a war. What do you want? Like, I wonder if that is part of the reason why, and it's not just this, but a lot of Russian atrocities get kind of ignored or underreported, or just underanalyzed. Is specifically because people just expect it to happen, and so it's not newsworthy enough to comment on.
I think that might be it. That there's like, well, that's war. Stuff happens like that. But then when they see Ukraine doing something normal, or Zelenskyy doing what he needs to do to raise awareness, then all of a sudden they're going to pay attention. It's like, oh, what's all of our weapons going to? Then a week later, somebody could answer, well, fighting this barbarism right here. It's like, oh, I didn't even know that happened. I didn't see that in my Twitter feed. I wonder why you didn't see that in your Twitter feed. I wonder why they didn't produce the 100 times more outrage that it should have produced. Because I tell you what, every Ukrainian I know knows about that video. Every person living in Ukraine knows about that video. Every Ukrainian soldier I know knows about that video and knows what they could be put under if they were put in Russian captivity. But most Americans that I've talked to don't even know anything about it. But I do know more Americans that know about the Vogue photo shoot. And it shows exactly how our priorities are not in order and what's getting the coverage.
It's insane to me that like all of these constant Russian atrocities are just ignored in favor of like bullshit aesthetic crap, like being mad at a first lady showing up in a fashion magazine. Like, holy shit, there's like, the Russians have killed at least 361 children as of today. That's the like confirmed number. So God knows how many are not confirmed. But that's 361 dead kids that you can directly lay at Russia's doorstep. No, not as important. Like, it as a Ukrainian, it's just really, really depressing. Because again, we rely entirely on international support. Without that support, Ukraine would lose the war pretty much instantly. I mean, not instantly, but our capabilities would very rapidly get grinded down, and the Russians would be able to do whatever they wanted to us. And judging by that video, they don't really want to have us over for tea and coffee. So it's so disheartening that people will blow crap like this, like insanely out of proportion, and then ignore actual evidence of genocide and war crimes and crimes against humanity. Because that really, like, psychologically has this effect where you start feeling like it's hopeless. No one cares about your conflict, and like the world's just gonna forget about you.
Is there anything else anybody wanted to say on this? Because we actually been going for 2 hours, which is, I think, my limit for this podcast. I'm not going to make this a 3-hour show. I know we wanted to talk about the Amnesty International report. We'll have to say that till the next episode. I think, plus it would allow me to try to get some people who are more familiar with international law and like examine what the report says. So, is there anything else anybody wanted to say before we wrap the show up?
I had a better answer to your question earlier about online, about leftists and how you engage with people who are falling for whatever different version of like the Russian side.
Sure. Shoot.
It's like, don't write people off so quickly. I think a lot, like, I imagine for 90% of like leftists who do this is like, it's just low information, or they haven't spent that much time thinking about it, or that's just what their social media feed has been curated to lead them to. I think it's always worth engaging with people like that. More or less, like, as one of us, or like on their terms. So if you're arguing with someone about why the annexation of Crimea was wrong, don't say like international law, or because that's just not what you do these days. It's like, well, think about like human rights of indigenous Tatar population who are like, their bodies are washing up in rivers, they've been found dead in the woods. Like that's something that can actually like is so much harder to defend from a left-wing perspective. Or like, it's not about like NATO shilling or American flag waving. It's about Ukrainian people. It's about people who don't deserve to have a fascist army attacking them. It's not about like defending every aspect of like the language laws. It's about a country that's had to deal with like 200 years of plus of colonialism. It's like a country that is still in the process of trying to decolonize itself, with the aggressor still being there. So I think that's always worth doing, is kind of remember that a lot of this kind of dissidence is coming from people who like I don't think are that difficult to move.
Oh, I think that's a good analysis there, Loner.
Thanks.
Maybe.
I hope you're right. There was a not too long ago, I had to block someone in the U.S. left that I actually really admire, or used to really admire, Ken Klippenstein, who is a reporter with The Intercept, and he's done a lot of great reports. And then he just carelessly retweets some Ukraine are all Nazis, or I think it was some bullshit propaganda stat about all the money, all the military aid being sent to Ukraine is just disappearing. And it's just like careless retweets like that. And like, I definitely understand where you're coming from, Loner. But it's so infuriating as a Ukrainian leftist to see that kind of careless shit. That it makes it hard to like react in a way that isn't hostile. Because it's like just another like example of my supposed comrades not actually giving a fuck about my existence, that they're just willing to just casually throw this stuff out there and muddy the waters and draw support away from Ukraine, that I just get incredibly, and not just me, this is the case with most Ukrainian leftists I've talked to. It's the kind of betrayal hits really hard.
Yeah. Well, it's also an extra burden on you, right? Because you not only have to defend yourself, but now you have to defend yourself in a way that's not hostile, right? In order to appease people who it doesn't really directly affect them.
Yeah, like if I go, and I've done this lots of times, you go and you say like, oh, like actually that's not true. Just have it in completely good faith. Just say, that's not true. That's Russian propaganda. They'll be like, well, is Azov Russian propaganda? Like, bro, that doesn't have anything to do with, but there are far right people in your government. Your government's far right. I'm like, no, it's not. Do you want to have like an actual conversation about the political status of Ukraine? But in a lot of cases, also, they don't. All they want to do is post like memes of the Ukrainian flag, of people holding up the swastika next to the Ukrainian flag, or pointing at how Azov's Wolfsangel is Nazi or something. It makes it incredibly hard to have a good faith conversation when the other side wants to use you as a prop for clout.
It's just such a weird would they ever use that anywhere near the same level of purity testing when it comes to, say, like a Palestinian population that Hamas is quite popular. They get a lot of votes. But yeah, obviously we don't subject them to the same level of purity testing because for some reason, like, it's easy to understand why they might lean that way. But with it, like, I'm not even saying I compare like Azov is like not in government, whereas Hamas is kind of is. So yeah, it's just it's weird. A lot of double standard.
I would like to thank you all for coming on the Ukraine report. I want to give you guys one last opportunity to shout out your stuff. I'm going to start with, again, my my Camlink merchant.
Again, you can read the new voice of Ukraine. The site is english.nv.ua. We are a daily independent news source putting out all the Ukraine news you can eat every single damn day. And then once a week or once every 2 weeks, you can listen to Ukraine Without Hype, which is hosted by me and a buddy of mine. where we again talk about the news in Ukraine, kind of like this, but not with Dylan usually.
Wow, that sounds like a downgrade though. If it's not with Dylan,
it might be. That might be why my Patreon numbers are falling. I think I might have to start shopping around for a new Dylan-shaped co-host.
Dylan-shaped co-host. Hey, Glenn Clipperstein. That's one thing I relate with him on is the shapes of our heads. You look very similar when it comes to head shape. We're gonna throw it now over to Lonerbox.
I just shot myself out again.
No, okay, don't. You can find him at twitch.tv/Hasanabi. And over to our lovely Daily Beast writer.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at plicta_Marcel, which will probably be in the video description because it's a bitch to spell. I mostly write articles about either Iranian drone-related stuff or the Wagner Group. So if you're interested in either of those two topics, or just like shitposting.
Fantastic. Can I ask you a
Twitter.
question? Isn't it true that the founder of the Wagner Group has a big old neo-Nazi tattoo on his chest?
No, he has two.
Ah, sorry. I spread some disinformation. I undershot how much of a fascist he is. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you all for coming on. You all have a blessed one. Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share the video. It's difficult to do this type of on-the-ground reporting from Ukraine and to try to get Ukrainian voices directly involved. It takes a lot of prep, a lot of effort, and we want to make sure that people can hear from Ukrainians directly and hear as the war continues to get less and less coverage in the mainstream press, and hear directly from people here on the ground and from the Scottish guy. Thank you so much for tuning into today's program.